Pastor Josh mentioned that he woke up this morning thinking about A Circle of Life, the Lion King song. I also woke up with a Disney song on my mind, oddly enough. I was thinking of The Little Mermaid, which isn't normal for me. But I was thinking of that song. I've got gadgets and gizmos aplenty. I've got who's its and what's its galore. You want thingamabobs? I've got 20, but who cares? No big deal. I want more. I want more. I was thinking, isn't that just kind of the song of our culture? It's the water we swim in, no pun intended. Like, this is just the world around us. How much is enough? Just a little bit more. There's a famous interview 100 years ago. John Rockefeller, the guy who built an empire around oil, amassed a net worth that would be one of the highest net worths in the world today if you accounted for inflation. This guy, just millions of dollars, doing so well 100 years ago. And there's this famous interview. Someone asked him, okay, you've amassed all this wealth. You've built all of this with your business. How much money do you think is enough money? And his answer, a little bit more. It's a primary problem. How much is enough? Just a little bit more. And it seems like it doesn't stop. He's one of the wealthiest men to ever live, and when he's asked how much is enough, his answer is honest, but his answer is kind of alarming. Just a little bit more. That's what we're talking about this morning is, as we look at generosity, something that we have to look at in our own lives is the myth of more. And when we think about what it's going to take to live a life that's satisfying, a life where we're actually experiencing joy or contentedness or happiness, the lie that we so often believe is that the thing that's going to make it happen is just a little bit more. And I want to just pause because I think as we look at that, there's hope to be had. But I also think the truth is that hope is kind of hard fought. It's kind of an uphill battle. Because the water, again, that we're swimming in is water where it's going to tell you that you need a little bit more. We're in a context where we're facing that delivery, that promise. Hey, a little bit more and you can be satisfied. And it doesn't stop. It's all around us. The average American today is reading about 5,000 advertisements in their daily life. And I think if you drive up and down Division for commute, it's closer to 10,000. Advertisements are everywhere, telling you, you know what you need is just a little bit more. What if you made a little bit more money? Like, greed is the problem that we're facing, and it's all around us. But the hard thing about greed is that it's one thing that you never see in yourself. Tim Keller wrote a book, Counterfeit Gods, and he says in this book that as he reflected on his pastoral life, greed is the one thing that he never had anyone come and confess to him. I was thinking about it in my own pastoral life. Just over the last 10 years, I've had people come up to me and talk about their struggle with lust, talk about the reality of pride in their life, that they deal with anger and it builds up in them. They don't know what to do with it. How do I confront this thing? You know what? I've never had someone come up and tell me, man, I see a lot of greed in myself. Greed might be a problem for them, but it's not a problem for me. I think if we're going to be able to see the hope on the other side of greed, we've got to come face to face with the reality that it's a problem not just for the world out there. It's a problem for us. It's a problem for me. What is it for you that catches your attention? What is it for you that you're thinking, man, just a little bit more here? What are the things that you daydream about, the things you fill your Amazon cart with? The tabs online that you have open waiting for you to be ready to purchase the thing that is going to bring a little bit more joy in your life. You know what it is for me? It's thinking about the life that I could build with my wife. What if we bought a house and how could we use it? And what if Lexi had a nicer car? What if I had new clothes for the fall and I felt great in them? What if I got a pair of shoes that I want? What if whatever? All of these things, like greed is a primary problem for me. And so what I want to do is ask you, is it possible that there's actually greed in your life? Is it possible that greed isn't a thing just for those people, but greed is a thing that actually has taken up occupancy in your own life, in your heart, and the way that you think about what does it mean to live a satisfied life? Part of that for us is, well, just a little bit more. And I think when we look at something like greed, we look at it and we go, well, clearly I know that's not the answer. Like, owning more stuff isn't actually going to make me more content in this life. But we live like it's true. And so we have to ask the question, why? Why do we go on continuing in a way that we're like, okay, I know that's not it. And when I come back to it, I see that. But I'm living in a way where, okay, hold on. If I do some reflection, maybe I am living in greed more than I want. I think we're looking at a reality that we've got two things happening in us, and they're competing. One is our deepest desires, what we know is good and life-giving, actually enriching for our lives, the things that we long for most deeply. But competing with that is the things that we desire the most strongly. The reality is that the things that we want most deeply in our life, it's just not always the loudest in our ear. That's what we're looking at in this series, practicing the ways. Well, how do I set up a set of life rhythms where what I desire most deeply in my life actually becomes what I desire most strongly? How do I live in such a way that what I'm longing for inside is rerouted so that when I think about what I'm daydreaming about, it's actually aligned to what I know is the healthiest for me. It's aligned to what I know Christ has for me. And so we're looking at something like practicing the way, saying, okay, I want to take this seriously. I want to see that what Scripture says is actually true. What Scripture says about finances, about money, about generosity, about our perspective towards stuff and materials in this world might actually be beneficial for my life. Not just as a good thing to believe and to desire deeply, but actually as a thing to really long for with our strongest desires, that would be the loudest voice in our life. And so we're going to look at a passage that's talking about this problem. We're going to be in 1 Timothy chapter 6. If you have your paper Bibles, you can open up to 1 Timothy chapter 6. But before we jump in, what's happening in this book is Paul is writing a letter to Timothy. And Timothy is in the church in Ephesus. And in this church, there's a ton of false beliefs that are floating around. And one of those false beliefs is that if you're close to God, if things are going well in your faith, then it should be evident in how well you're doing in life financially. Like if you're close to godliness, then you would have great gain. You'd look pretty good in the eyes of the world. And Paul's going to write and he's going to say, hey, that message of greed isn't the message of hope. It's not the message of Jesus in this world. There's actually a different message, and he's going to say it in verse 6. And so I'm going to read chapter 6, verse 6 of 1 Timothy. Here's what Paul writes. But godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into the world, and we cannot take anything out of the world, but if we have food and clothing, with these things we will be content. But the ones who desire to be rich fall into temptation, into a snare, and to many senseless and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evils. It is through this craving that some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pangs. Here's the first thing we want to look at. Is the first thing Paul says in this section is in verse 6, but godliness with contentment is great gain. Maybe the message of the world is, hey, if you do well, you could build a kingdom for yourself. Paul says godliness with contentment is great gain. I was thinking about that point, and this story came to my mind. I have a buddy who told me this story about a group of men who went to the coast for a trip. While they were on the coast, they decided they'd go out on a sailboat for the day. And so they reached out to this guy who owned a sailboat, and he took them out on a 3-hour sailing tour. That's a Gilligan's Island joke. They go out on this boat. They're having a good time. They get to lunch, and they're thinking, man, what this guy has going is pretty special, this whole like sailboat tour thing. What if this was really like a whole thing? And so they schemed over lunch, and they built a business plan for this guy. After lunch, they looked at the guy and said, okay, what you've got here is really fun. We like it a lot. What if, just imagine with me, what if you had 20 boats in 4 different cities, and over the next 15 years, you built this into just a huge business that was thriving. And here's a plan, and here's a way that we could work toward it. And the man who owned the boat looked at them and he said, okay, well, why would I do that? Why would I spend 15 years of my life working toward that? And the group of men responded, they said, well, I mean, imagine the freedom that you could have. Imagine being able to take your kids' birthdays off from work, to go home for lunch, go home to your family every night, and create your own schedule, the freedom that you could have in this life. And the man who owned the boat looked at him and he said, well, right now, it's just me in this boat. And if I want to go home for lunch, I go home for lunch. I make my own schedule. If I want a day off, I could take it off. So why would I work for 15 years to maybe have what I already have? What did he have? He had contentment. He had perspective, not on what he could have, but on what he already had. What God had already given him. Here's the reality: is contentment frees us from craving. The never-ending reality of craving, of just a little bit more. We're freed from that when we walk in contentment. When we walk in appreciation of what God has actually done in our lives. More than daydreaming about what we could build or what we could attain or whatever. We actually get to walk out in gratitude for what God has already done. So often, all of the things that fill our minds, fill our daydreams, they're going to turn to dust anyway. They're more aligned to the strong desires than they are the deep desires. And Paul continues on that thought in verse 7. For we brought nothing into the world, and we cannot take anything out of the world, but if we have food and clothing, these we will be content. With these we will be content. Here's the first thing I want to look at is that idea of eternal perspective. That we could spin our wheels trying to build and amass a kingdom or an empire of wealth or whatever it is. And at the end of the day, it's not what matters most. There's an old saying, you can't attach a U-Haul to a hearse. All of the things that we're filling our minds with thinking, what if? What if I had that next thing? What if I had a life like the next guy? All of that isn't what matters most to us. I was talking with a volunteer this morning who has just taken observations. She's written down over the last few Christmases with her family, what did we do that was worth doing again? And as she's done this year after year, she told me this morning that she realized what she wants to do in the future is just spend less. The moments that they look back and they remember that are the most meaningful are centered around relationship, around people. That's the thing that you carry with you through life. That's the kind of stuff that you look back and you realize that you valued the most. Not just a pile of things to acquire. And so as we move forward, Paul's highlighting the reality of an eternal perspective. What are you actually going to carry forward in your life that you really care about, that really matters to you? And when we see that, then we understand what he's saying about being content with less. He says in verse 8, but if we have food and clothing, we can be content. Here's the truth. If you asked me, hey, what is it going to take in your life to just feel content? I'm going to have a list longer than food and clothing. It's probably true for most of us in the room. If you think about what are the bare bones? What is it that's going to actually make you feel satisfied in this life? Odds are for everyone in the room, it's more than just food and clothing. We want more stuff. We want just a little bit more. But what happens when you get a little bit more is that little bit more becomes normal. What you longed for yesterday became normal to you today. And you look forward and life gets more complex, filled with more things to manage. There's an old parable about a man in India, and this man was a guru, and he was visiting around these different villages, and he spent some time with one man, raising him up, discipling him, and the man got to a point where the guru thought, okay, I can leave this man on his own, and the man lived in this village, and his purpose was to learn what it means to live on little, and so he devoted his life to have nothing but his hut and his loincloth, and he would go through his day, and he would beg for food, and he would wash his loincloth in the morning and leave it out hanging to dry. But after a couple weeks, he went out and he realized that the rats had gotten to his loincloth. and it was torn apart and there were holes in it. And so he started to think, okay, well, I can't have this happen again. So he replaced it, and he thought, well, if I want to keep the rats away, then I need to get a cat, and that'll keep them away. So he got a cat. But then he realized that the cat needed milk. And so he thought, well, I don't want to have to beg for the milk, so maybe I'll get a cow. So he got the cow, and he realized that the cow needed food, and so he went and he planted gardens to care for the cow. Then he realized that he was spending all his time caring for the gardens. So he thought, well, I should hire some people to help me care for this land so that the land can care for the cow, so that the cow can care for the cat, so that the cat can keep the rats away from the loincloth. And after a few years, he found himself the wealthiest man in the village. The guru came back and he said, what happened to living on nothing? The man said, I know you probably won't believe me, but I just needed all this to make sure that I could take care of my loincloth. Life doesn't get more simple the more you add to it. You think, well, if I had that next thing, then it would bring a little bit of freedom in my life. The reality is the opposite. The more that you get, the more that you're tied to. The more that you have to manage and care for the things that are in front of you, the more you're actually constricted by what you own. See, stuff, it promises satisfaction and freedom, but what it brings is constraining. It's easy to look at the next thing, but what God invites us into is gratitude for what he's already given us. Gratitude for his presence that sustains us. It's gratitude to God for what he has done rather than grumbling for what he hasn't. I think the reality too is that God just wants more for us than a life that's a rat race. Stuck on a wheel, hoping for the next thing. He wants more for us than that, because the reality is that that kind of life is dangerous for your soul. It's actually a really heavy thing that Paul is saying. He continues in verse 9, but those who desire to be rich will fall into temptation, into a snare, into many senseless and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. He's saying that desire for riches, the love of money, it's actually going to bring ruin and destruction. That's pretty strong language. Here's what I think he's getting at, is our love of money, our desire to be rich, will cause us to use money to serve ourselves instead of serving others. Our love of money and desire to be rich will cause us to serve ourselves instead of serving others. I want to name two primary ways I think that we use money to serve ourselves instead of serving the world around us. Here's the first, is we use money to manage how we look. We use money to build a lavish lifestyle, to buy the next thing that we want, to buy gadgets and gizmos aplenty, who's its and what's its galore. We spend our money on these external things. Look at these things that I got. That's the first. The second is we use money to manage how we feel. It's a little bit more discreet, but we use money to build up a rainy day pile that's so large that we feel invincible. Well, now I'll be prepared when something happens. We use money to spend it on our own feeling of safety. The danger for the person who uses money that way is that they'll look at someone who lives a lavish lifestyle and think, how foolish is that? That's all just surfacey. Well, the person who's spending their money on feeling safe is still spending money on themselves, just in a unique way. This perspective of money that it can be an opportunity to serve others is counterintuitive. It's often really hard. I came across this long quote I'm about to read, and I just want to say I read it and I was mad. I was like, get this quote out of my life. You don't know me. And here it is. The money for your expensive coffee this morning belonged to the child who came to school with no breakfast. The new winter coat hanging in your closet next to 4 other coats now out of style belongs to the homeless person you passed on your way downtown last weekend. And the money you saved for retirement would make the difference between subsistence and starvation for the sweatshop workers who made your favorite hiking boots worn only twice. Wherefore, as many as you have wronged, you might have aided. More than a guilt trip, I think what this idea offers us is just a glimpse into what it would look like with a perspective shift from money serving us into money serving the people around us. This author is making the point that your paycheck is one of the primary ways that you're afforded serving your community. The opportunity that you have to serve your community through your paycheck is actually astronomical. And I'm going to be honest with you, that's not the way I think about my paycheck. What we're being invited to with this flip of the myth of more and realizing that a little bit more isn't going to be what it takes to make you feel satisfied and content is an opportunity to shift our perspective away from the whole world is oriented toward me getting what I want and me building a kingdom about me into maybe God has a bigger purpose and use for my life with my income. And maybe it's through the lens of generosity, this practice that we're looking at. But again, it's hard. It's hard to trust God, to not have the rainy day pile, to not have the lifestyle that we want, that culture around us is telling us, get this thing. The businesses are literally designing their whole model around convincing us that we need more to be content, to keep up, to have a life that's satisfying. But the reality is that developing generosity in the present requires adequately trusting for the future. Developing generosity in the present requires adequately trusting for the future. That kind of trust, that kind of living into generosity is what Paul describes later in verse 17. I'm going to read it. As for the rich in this present age, charge them not to be haughty, nor to set their hopes on the uncertainty of riches, but on God, who richly provides us with everything to enjoy. They are to do good, to be rich in good works, and to be generous and ready to share. Now, I read that verse 17, and my honest response is, well, it said, as for the rich, I don't think I qualify. I don't think I'm one of the rich. But here's the truth, is everyone's a little bit more is going to look a little bit different. And it doesn't stop. I remember when I was in college, I was serving tables, I was getting by, I was sharing a bunk bed made out of 2x4s and plywood that a roommate and I put together. And a mentor came alongside of me and he said, hey, tell me what generosity looks like in your life. And I said, well, I think it's probably a good thing, but I don't have the income to live into that right now. I think I'll probably start doing that once I get a more stable job. And he looked at me and he said, life is going to get more complex, and you're setting the trajectory for your generosity right now in the way that you're living. I was caught looking at, well, once I'm at the next phase, then I could live generously in the way that I know I want to. Maybe once I'm renting my own space, then I could live generously in the way that I think I should. Maybe once I have the stable job with the income that I probably need, then I could live generously. But then you get to that point and you think, well, maybe once I own a house and it's actually my own and my expenses are a little bit more settled, then I could be generous. And then you get there and you think, well, maybe once I'm a few years down the line and there's a little bit more freedom, then I could be generous in the way that I think I should. And it just doesn't stop. It progresses and you keep on saying like, well, maybe with a little bit more, then I could be generous in the way that I'm supposed to. And here's the truth, is your impact isn't limited by your income. Your impact isn't limited by your income. And it's true for the person that's tighter on money right now, and it's true for the person that's great in wealth. Your impact isn't limited by your income. It's not defined by it. The world is telling us that we need a little bit more, and the lie that we believe is that once we get a little bit more, then we could live in the way that we want to. But the truth is that if you live into what God is inviting you into, to be content with not that much, with food and clothing, if you live with contentment for what God has given you, then you could live in a way that's different toward the world. But I think the truth is that we kind of know that. We've kind of heard that. We kind of believe that, and it lives in maybe our deeper desires. Sure, I know that what I have doesn't define me, and what I could get won't define my future. And I understand that there's value in being generous, and that I could be generous today, and that if I am being generous, there's a way to be more generous, and that believing the lie that a little bit more is going to make me content is foolish, and I shouldn't do that. So then why do we keep finding ourselves with a lifestyle that's out of alignment with our values? I think part of it is that we've fallen into rhythms of the world that form us into the way of the world. And again, we're looking at spiritual practices that would set us up to see our deepest desires take up occupancy in our lives, and that they would become our strongest desires. And I want to just offer a couple things that I think are helpful when we think about what does it look like to actually question, to step back and reflect on the way that we're living with regard to our finances in this life. A couple practices and rhythms that we could implement in our daily life that might help us realign our lives to the values that we say that we have, the values that we long to have and see lived out in our lives. Here's the first one: simplicity. What if the way to fight the lie that you need more is to actually just live with less? What if that's part of it? One person defines simplicity as the intentional promotion of the things we most value and the removal of everything that distracts us from them. Practically lived out, it's serving the question, what if you had only what you needed and there just wasn't as much stuff to worry about? The boxes in the garage that you don't know what's even in them. What if you just got rid of them? Whatever that looks like, again, in different seasons. But there was one owner of this tech company, and he made the conscious decision that he wanted to focus on what he cared about most. He wanted to focus on his business. And so he decided that he wasn't going to buy anything. And he was interviewed about it. And they asked, I don't think, you've done so well in your business, but you don't own any land, you don't own a home, you don't own a car. Why? And he said, well, if I get a house, I'm going to want it to look nice. I'm going to have to take care of it and spend some energy and time, and it's going to take a lot of time. If I get a car, it's going to need maintenance, and I'm going to want to keep it up to date and do well with it. All of these things are going to require so much of my attention. I just want to focus on this business. What do you value most? And are the things that you own actually designed intentionally to be around helping you care about what you care most about? Have you actually filled your life with things that would orient you toward what you care about? And for most of us as Christians, the things that we care about is serving God and serving people. So the stuff that you filled your life with, is it actually helping you care for people? Is it actually helping you focus on your relationship with Christ? Is it actually helping you give and devote your attention to what you care for most in this world? Or is it pulling you from it? And again, I think I hear that story and I'm like, must be nice for tech mogul guy who's so wealthy that he can live without anything. But I don't want you to miss what's actually offered to you in simplicity. What's offered to you in simplicity is freedom from the lie that you have to build something huge to experience satisfaction. So for the person with excess, what's offered in simplicity is getting rid of the excess and coming back to what you care for most. For the person that's not living in excess right now, what's offered to you is the opportunity to not have to build a life that's devoted to stuff. But as you move forward in life, to come back to what matters most to you. The next practice we could look at is silence. An opportunity to get away from the noise, to put your phone down and see less ads, to focus less on what you could get in this life, and to enter into silence and do some self-examination. To really question, what are you daydreaming about? To really think through what's going through your mind. Is it aligned to your values, and is it not? In silence, we actually have the opportunity to see what we're thinking about most. And then lastly is generosity. It's the practice that we're talking about this month, looking at what if the way to focus less on what I could gain is to actually step into giving things away. Maybe things that you actually really enjoy. What would it look like to orient your life, your perspective around stuff, not toward what you could get out of the rooms that you're in, but what you could give to them? to walk into a space and not think, okay, what is this going to offer me? But what could you actually bring to the people around you? How could you actually serve the people around you? And as you do that, you step into this little memory verse that we're looking at, that the generous will prosper. Those who refresh others will themselves be refreshed. Maybe not with more accumulation, but with actually something that matters a lot more, which is satisfaction of your soul, feeding yourself in a way that really matters. I think that picture of generosity, there's no greater display of generosity than the cross. The truth that a God who had it all chose to humble himself and give it all so that we could have it. Here's how 2 Corinthians 8 verse 9 says it. For you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sake he became poor, so that you by his poverty might become rich. When we think about generosity in this life, when we think about reorienting ourselves around what we actually care about, there's no greater picture than the cross. And this morning we're going to receive communion. So I want to invite you to just open up the little bread and the little juice. There's a lot that could be said about communion. All of the things that we could see and learn about who Jesus is from receiving communion. But this morning, I just want you to look at that little piece of bread and remember Christ's body as a display of generosity toward you. And so as we receive this together, I just want to invite you to reflect on God's generosity in your life, and you can receive the bread. You can receive the juice. Here's the truth, is that our striving to undo the greed that's in our own hearts is never going to free us from the reality that it's still there. What frees us from it is what Christ has done and is doing on the cross and in our hearts and in our minds. That through the cross, he offers something that our own efforts never can. And so what I don't want you to hear is that strive to become more like the kind of person that you should be. What I want you to hear is that there's freedom through the cross. That God sees the reality of our hearts, the reality of the things that we fixate ourselves on, the reality of what we're looking at, thinking this is going to bring happiness. He sees it, and rather than turning from us, he steps into it to pull us out of it. If I could go back to Princess Ariel, there she is swimming in the water of greed, looking at what else she could acquire. But if you remember the next part of the song, what does she say? Up where they walk, up where they run, up where they play all day in the sun. She wants to be part of a different world. The truth of the gospel is that God came into this world to free us from it. He came into the waters we swim in to pull us out of them so that we could enter back into this world with a renewed perspective. The lie is that a little bit more will fill you up. The truth is that you've been given more than you could imagine. So this morning, I just want to ask you, as you step into this week, would you take a moment to locate yourself in some of these ideas? And I have some questions that might help you do that. Here's the first one. In what ways am I striving to get just a little bit more? Number two, what has God provided me with that I could actually just be grateful for? Number three, how can I use the resources I have to serve those around me this week? And then lastly, from those three practices, the idea of simplicity, silence, and generosity, which could I actually step toward this week? But as you do that, I just want to remind you, it's not so that you can earn the title of being a good enough person or so that you could fix yourself. The truth is that all of these things help us realize what God has already done. And so if you stand up with me, I'll leave you with a benediction. May we be men and women who are content and live free from the craving for more, and who live in light of the generosity of our God. Amen? All right, have a great week.
Hey, we are so glad that you found us online and joined us today. At Summit, we aim to be a people that are attentive to the Spirit and sensitive to the voice of God. So if, while you've been with us today, the Spirit's been putting on your heart that it's time to dive deeper, I'd encourage you to fill out the Connect card. Just scan the code on the screen, and this is your way to get a call from a pastor. This is how we can pray with you and partner with you where you're at. But if you're really looking to go deeper, I can tell you that on our YouTube and on our website, we have all of our sermon archives, and this is a great way for you to dive into Scripture and learn more about God. We, again, are a people led by God, and you can follow with us on our journey. So if you're local, we would love to meet you. We'd love to see you in person. And if you're not local, we believe that church is best done in person when we can see each other. And so we'd honestly encourage you to pray about finding a community in your own city, a place where you can be known and know others. But we love you. We're so glad we got to spend some time with you today. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you next week.